Um, we were going to have somebody do a review. I guess I can do a quick review. So we've been going through Exodus, and then last week, does anybody remember what the topic was? Exodus, crossing the Red Sea, right? And I think we have folders, right? So we should have some notes from last week. I just try and pull out a review from you guys. What did the Red Sea represent? Anybody? Baptism. Okay. Crossing the Red Sea is kind of, we believe in the Lord. That's the first step. And then the second step, baptism, would be kind of symbolized there through the crossing of the Red Sea. And we saw that this was God's arrangement, first through the calling of Moses and then through the situation with the plagues. I was impressed by something recently when I was kind of considering this, is that God didn't ask the children of Israel to pick up swords and to fight their way out of Egypt with the Egyptians, right? He came in and actually he did everything for them. So there's a principle here that God wants to do everything for us and be everything to us. So he has come in to the children of Israel who were there enslaved in Egypt, and they went through the situation where the plagues were one after the other, and eventually they left Egypt. They had the Passover. We had that 3 weeks ago, and then we covered crossing the Red Sea. So up until this point, God has done everything for the children of Israel. That was covering chapter 12. You have the Passover, and then chapter 14 in Exodus, you have the Red Sea that we covered last week. This week, we're going to talk about Exodus chapter 16, which is manna. How many of us are familiar with manna? Show of hands. Okay, good number of us familiar with manna. So the children of Israel have just crossed the Red Sea by the parting, and they went through these two experiences that are in chapter 15 that I'll just cover very quickly. We need water before we need food. We can survive longer without food than we can without water. So the first thing that happened is they came to this place called Mara, and Mara had water that they couldn't drink because it was bitter. There was a situation there where a tree was cast into the water, and the bitter water became sweet, and that became a supply of water to them. So there's a lot of significance there. We won't cover it. In Elim, which was the second place they came to, there were springs and there was shade from the desert heat and the wilderness, and so this became a resting place. They had water and they had rest there at Elim. But God's purpose in calling them out of Egypt wasn't to be at Mara, and it wasn't to be at Elim, even though Elim was a place of rest. God wanted something else out of his children that he's called out of Egypt. And we'll see tonight that actually he's calling us out of Egypt. And this was the Exodus that we covered last week, and now we're going to be talking about manna. Does anybody, if we were to relate this to Egypt, any idea what I could put at the bottom of the slide here as far as what manna would represent? So we've been positionally separated at this point, because we know that these are pictures. This is not just us looking at the children of Israel as a people that we're disconnected from, but this is a picture. These things were written for our admonition. This is a picture of our Christian life. And initially, we are positionally separated from the world. Egypt represented the world. Again, we covered that. Now we're talking about being dispositionally separated, dispositionally sanctified. So, maybe you've heard the term, you can get a person out of this city, but you can't get that city. Sometimes it's with an accent or something like that. If I was up here speaking with a very thick accent, you might be able to tell where I was from, even though we're in Colorado, if I had a very thick Southern accent, oh, he's from the South. It'd be represented where I was from through my expression. And so it's the same deal here. Manna is actually a heavenly food. It has its source in the heavens. And the purpose is that it is provided to God's people for reconstituting them and getting the Egypt out of God's people. So the Exodus getting out of Egypt, and manna getting the Egypt out of us. I was going to use this illustration, but then I realized I would probably fail at it. If I asked you to tell me what your favorite food is, I may be able to tell you where you're from. So I'll do this instead. Some of you know me, so don't shout it out if you know the answer. If I told you what my favorite food is, I'm going to guess that you could probably tell me where I was from. So my favorite food is a cheesesteak. It wasn't that hard, especially since they've been all over based on the Super Bowl. Yeah, okay. That's so. The picture there is actually, we're known by what we eat, right? We're known by what we eat. So I don't live in Philadelphia anymore, but I still have a craving for that because I grew up with that, and I learned to love that as I was growing up with it. It's the same picture here. The children of Israel actually, one of the first things they did as they entered the wilderness was they complained. And they complained specifically about their food. So Matt showed us last week that the quickest way out of Egypt here to get to the good land was a 10-day journey, kind of from this point to this point. What's in red here is believed to be the journey of the children of Israel. So you can see not the most direct route, and also not a 10-day route. It was a 40-year route. So a significant difference there. What is the need for 40 years instead of 10 days? Does anybody want to take a guess at that? In overall context, yeah. Yeah. That, I mean, it's very much our experience, isn't it? Yeah. We're not necessarily ready because our Constitution needs to be changed. How much food do you think they had when they came out of Egypt? You may have an idea. When they left Egypt, they had some food with them. Like I mentioned, they went to this place called Mara. Then they went to Elim. At this point, when they get to the wilderness, they had about a month and a half's worth of food. They're out of food. But in Deuteronomy, there's a verse that says in Deuteronomy 8:3, and this is talking about God, he humbled you and let you go hungry. He humbled you and let you go hungry. God knew exactly how much food they had and what their need was going to be. Yet God let them run out of food and then arranged that they would be in the wilderness. God doesn't do anything haphazardly, without thought, without wisdom. They needed to know their situation and their condition. They needed to know that their constitution was still Egyptian, because their first complaint was about remembering all the things of Egypt, the leeks and the onions and the garlic and the cucumbers and the melons and things like that. They were actually, I don't know how, but a people who were enslaved for generations, who had just passed through the plagues. What was at the top of their mind was the food that was in Egypt. Like, they had forgotten about what oppression was, what slavery was, what it was to have all of your firstborn children killed. They were focused on the food. It was because there were some who were raised there. So for 400 years, there's a generation they were just Egyptian. They were the children of God by name, but by constitution, by what they had been taking in from the time that they were young, was just Egyptian food. And so we're kind of born into this situation. If we take this picture, we have an Egyptian diet from birth. We are Egyptian by nature. But what God does is he supplies them with food that is from the heavens. Exodus 16:4 says, "Then Jehovah said to Moses, I will now rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day." This is the first time where there is a food source on the earth that came, whose source actually was heaven. So God is actually calling his people out. He's bringing them into the wilderness, and then he is becoming the source of supply of life to them. When you think of the wilderness, just give me some adjectives. What would you say? What would you call the wilderness? Empty? Empty is a good one. Actually, there's a verse in Jeremiah that says, no one dwells in it. Anybody else? Challenging. Yeah, I would say it's challenging. Yeah. Dry is a good one. There's another verse that's in Deuteronomy that says it had thirsty ground. The wilderness had thirsty ground. There's another verse in Deuteronomy that kind of describes this area having fiery serpents and scorpions. There's not a real pleasant description of the wilderness. Do you know what God refers to the wilderness as? Does anybody know? From his point of view, in Deuteronomy, he says it's a great and awesome wilderness. Why the two conflicting views? One is kind of man's view in looking around at the situation and considering fiery, serpents, scorpions, dry ground. It says dry ground and there's nothing to drink. There's, again, I mentioned the verses in Jeremiah that says no one passes through it, no one dwells in it. But to God, in his view, it's great and awesome. It's great and awesome. Listen, God, in Deuteronomy, there's a good description of the good land, and it's a really long verse. And then it carries on through other verses of all the things that are there, the water brooks and all the fruits and the honey and the milk and things like that. It's like the kind of peak land. God created that. God also created the wilderness. So God is very aware of this situation. So if we consider it in our circumstances and situations as a Christian, we might have the experience of Elam where, we have some, maybe Mara, where something bitter becomes sweet. We've just been saved. Then we go on to Elam and we're resting in God. God is bringing us on to the wilderness where if we have man's view, we may see fiery serpents, scorpions, thirsty ground. If we have God's view, we're going to see manna. We'll see next week that he was the spiritual rock. Actually, he is becoming everything to man in the wilderness. And he is reconstituting his people in the wilderness. So that's why God describes the wilderness as great and awesome. Because these people that he's called out of Egypt, in the situation of the wilderness, they are being reconstituted to be those who would be qualified to build him a dwelling place, even become his dwelling place. So I have a number of verses on your sheets, and they're not necessarily in order. One of the other ones I don't think that I have there is John 6:32. Just so that you're aware, Exodus 16 can be read kind of in parallel with John chapter 6 towards the end of the chapter. There's a lot of parallels that are drawn there with the living bread. It's the Lord Jesus speaking, and he's presenting himself as the manna. In John 6:32, he says, I am the true bread. I am the true bread. And I wanted to bring this point out that true implies that there's a false bread. True implies that there are other things. And in Deuteronomy, where he humbled us and let us go hungry, actually, he has to show us in John chapter 6, there's another verse that says that work not for the food that perishes. We have to go through this experience where all the other things would dry up. They wouldn't satisfy. And the Lord, in his wisdom, he knows exactly what those things are. He knows what we're constituted with. It doesn't have to necessarily be something negative. But if it doesn't match God in his expression, then we need this time to see that there are false breads out there. In other words, we can take those things in of the world, and we have this false sense of fulfillment. And eventually we run out and we become hungry. And when we're hungry, we're seeking. What happens? The Lord knows this. He's arranged this. It's his mercy that runs out. And then he supplies us with heavenly manna. As an example, I just want to ask you this question. You don't have to give me the answer. I just want you to think about it. If I asked you to come up here and speak about something that you were passionate about for 10 to 15 minutes, you don't get any time to prepare. You don't have any slides. You don't have any help. There's probably one, maybe two, sometimes there's more things that you could just stand up and just speak about. Okay, for that period of time. It's not that long of a period of time, but you could probably accurately speak, make some good points and things like that. I'd like you to consider before the Lord, those things can be your constitution. They can be your constitution because the only reason you could stand up and flow out and speak those things is because you've been taking the time to take those things in. So, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's negative. But if it hasn't been yet dealt with by God, then it's contrary. And if that's part of our constitution, then the only way for that to be changed is through eating. There's almost like a law of displacement in operation here, where the more we're eating, the more purging out of Egypt is going on in our being. We'd like to get to the point where I can stand up and I can give 10 to 15. I'm not saying me. I'm saying if we all could do this in our experience, I could stand up and I could speak to you for 10 minutes about the blood of Christ. I could talk about fundamental things that are related to salvation. That would then be a testimony to the gospel. Those are the kind of people that God needed in order to build his house in the wilderness here, we'll see in a few weeks, as a tabernacle where God came to dwell with man. They weren't qualified yet because their constitution of other things that they could talk about for 10 to 15 minutes was up here. God needed some room within them to grow, like you mentioned, right? We needed to learn some lessons, and we needed to have this hunger within us. So he's bringing us into the wilderness. It's his arrangement. And he in his view, it's great and it's awesome. So this was their the people's kind of expression. Exodus 16:15. I don't know if you have that on your sheet. You do. Okay. Why don't we all read that out loud together? Ready? Go. What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread which Jehovah has given you to eat." They said, "What is it?" The manna literally means, what is it? What is it? Right? We don't know. We don't recognize it actually because until this point, our diet was not supplied from heaven. So when we have an earthly diet, we have an Egyptian diet, we are constituted with earthly things and Egyptian things. But when we have a source and supply in the heavens, it slowly constitutes us and makes us heavenly people. So, I appreciate a lot of aspects. I could probably fill this slide with different aspects. I only picked a few of them. But manna is a mystery. And in Colossians 2:2, at the end of that verse, it says the mystery of God, Christ. The mystery of God, Christ. So manna is a mystery, and there's also this mystery of Christ. Manna is a long-term miracle. Exodus 16:35. Without looking at your sheet, does anybody know how long they were eating this? I may have mentioned it earlier, so if you were paying attention, you might have the answer. 40 years. 40 years. There was this one period of time where they kind of rebelled, and then after that, it was 38 consecutive years where they were eating only manna. It's not that, when we eat something, this is why I like the picture that the Lord gives us here. We can all understand it. When we eat something, you ate yesterday, right? You ate dinner tonight, you're going to eat again tomorrow. You can't rely on what you ate yesterday to supply you and sustain you today. And you can't use something in the future, right, to sustain you today. We only have today. We're not promised tomorrow. We don't have yesterday anymore. We have this continuous need to eat. He made us an eating people. So this inherent need in us to eat is actually very much related to our inherent need for Christ as our supply. It's a long-term miracle. We know that we're not going to be transformed overnight. Our constitution is not going to change overnight, but the Lord is new every morning. His compassions are new every morning. There's some verses that we have on the back of the sheet for practically looking at this, but actually there's prayers here, and I'll just cover it because of the long-term miracle. I'll just give you what these are here. In Psalm 5:3, "O Jehovah, in the morning you'll hear my voice." This is a psalmist speaking. This should actually be our speaking. Lord, you're going to hear my voice in the morning. I'm going to come to you in prayer. And then in 143:8, it's caused me to hear your loving kindness in the morning. In other words, there's a genuine longing there. If I'm talking to somebody or I want to meet with somebody, I want a response back. This is the Lord's feeling, and it's day by day. It's day by day. That's how our constitution changes. It's from heaven. We mentioned that. And then in John 6, I told you these are parallel kind of chapters. Towards the end of that chapter, they're actually murmuring at the Lord Jesus because he said that he was the bread that came down out of heaven. He's the reality of this manna. And then it's round. The description there is in Exodus 16:14 and John 8:58. He's the great I am. He's the Alpha, he's the Omega, so he is also eternal. And then I appreciate it in Numbers 11:48. There's a little bit more exposition about manna. Why don't we read this one all together? Ready, go.
And they boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And its taste was like the taste of cakes.
Okay, so there's a matter here about manna is supplied. They go out, they collect it, and then it's prepared. It takes a little bit of work for them to make it into a cake. The significance here is that sometimes we come to the Lord in the morning. We may come to the Word, and we may get a particular verse, and it takes the entire day to chew on it, to muse it, to digest it. And it takes the situation of the wilderness in order for that to get imparted into our being to where it becomes something of our constitution. So there's a need for the manna to be worked into our being through our circumstances. So it's not just the manna, it's the manna plus the wilderness. And those two things come together in this verse where they're prepared through our situations. I'm gonna ask this question. So I'm gonna show you here in Exodus 16:4. Let's supposed to say, then Jehovah said to Moses, I will now rain bread from heaven for you. Does anybody know what verse would match this that would show the relationship here or the picture where Christ is the reality? Yeah, John 6:51. 650, sorry. 650. There's actually a number of verses. So I just picked this one. So why don't we read John 6:50 all together? Ready, go.
I am the living bread which came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he shall live forever.
So God saying, I'm going to rain down bread from heaven, and then Christ, when he's on the earth, speaking, saying that he is the reality of this bread. I mentioned this is a heavenly food, and this needs to be taken in. The kind of principle of eating is that something from without is taken within, and then it metabolically becomes something of us. So everybody knows how to finish this sentence, right? Right. Easy one, right? You are what you eat. So we're becoming what we eat. So we're becoming over a long period of time, over 40 years. Anybody know the significance of 40 years? It's a time of testing. It's also a time of completion. So Moses went to the wilderness for 40 years before he returned and dealt with Pharaoh. And then they spent another 40 years in the wilderness. And I wanted to point this out because I feel like sometimes this is our situation. So God, again, he created the wilderness. He's very aware of the situation. He's also very aware that that he is supplying his children with food. He's saying that I may test them. The Lord, he gave us a choice. Actually, if we go all the way back to Genesis, there's two trees and there's a choice in eating. And I was impressed when I was kind of reading through this that our choice in what we eat can have life and death consequences. Life and death. We know that, if I were to eat bacon every day for the next 15 years, I might not be around in 15.5 years, right? So the choice that I made every day for that long period of time actually has a life and death effect. In Psalm 78:18, the children of Israel are trying to test God by asking for food according to their desire. They complained and they wanted quail. They wanted meat. They talked about these Egyptian things. But as I mentioned, according to God's mercy, he actually lets those things run out. So many times, the Lord may even let us have those things. In this picture, they wanted meat. He brought in quail, and it's kind of gross, actually. It was piled up, and they ate it until they were throwing up, and it was coming out of their nose. It's gross, right? They actually, when they talked about what they wanted, this stood out to me too. They wanted from Egypt the fish. But one of the plagues was that the water in the Nile was turned to blood. It stunk. They went and tried to dig wells and they found more blood. But their thought is that they want fish from Egypt. That's how, if we have the proper view, we have to pass through these experiences so that we have this view. I don't want that fish. I don't want fish that's been swimming around in blood that died. It's the whole river stank. Didn't smell very pleasant. So they were asking for things apart from the heavenly diet that God was providing them with. This is what I mentioned again in Genesis 2:17. And actually, I wanted to point this out because this stood out to me. The day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. We can kind of liken this tree to Egypt and the Egyptian diet. It's only death. Remember, Matt said, I think last week, if we wanted to turn and try to go back across the Red Sea, it's just death. There's nothing back there. There's just a bunch of dead Egyptians on the seashore. So eating of this tree results in death. Here's John 6:51, Danny. So I am the living bread which came down out of heaven. So actually the result here is living forever. There's still a choice. And actually, we live because of what we eat. I mentioned eating bacon for a number of years, resulting in death. But this in John 6:57, as the living Father has sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me shall live because of me. So as our constitution is being changed, we're living because of what we're constituted with. And I don't normally bring my phone when I speak, but I wanted to try to make a point. I have a Bible app on my phone. I believe many of you probably do too. It's an easy way to get to your Bible to read. I also, unfortunately, have 50 other apps that have notifications that come across, right? And so there's nothing else to eat in the wilderness. There's only manna. And in Egypt, they have all these other things that they mention and lay out. It's like a buffet. But your phone becomes that, right? Your phone can easily become a buffet of things. And you can look and, oh, here's manna. I'm reading the Bible. I'm spending time with the Lord. And here's a buffet. And it doesn't take much to get distracted by a buffet, to just get drawn. Have you ever had that experience? You're 2-3 minutes into some type of social media, and 3 hours later, you're like, what am I doing? Right? You've gotten lost in the buffet, but there's a choice, right? And so, I don't want to tell you guys what I would put that away, put it to the side, spend time, with the Lord in that way. It's removing the buffet from the time when you're with the Lord. It makes it more precious, and it actually helps to change your constitution. So some examples quickly of let's eat. Jeremiah 15:16. Let's read that all together. Ready, go.
Your words were found, and I ate them, and your word became to me the gladness and joy of my heart.
Okay. Job 23:12. This is the second part of that verse. Let's read that one. Ready, go.
I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread.
So God was the first dietitian, right? He was showing us our need. He was letting us go hungry, and he was showing us our constitution. Our constitution is so important because it issues in a particular expression. So we can only actually express where we're constituted with. And I really appreciated. So in John 6:34, again, this is in parallel with Exodus 16. Disciples are kind of going back and forth with the Lord, and he's describing himself as the bread that you can eat and hunger nevermore. They say to him, give us this bread always. I think they had a little bit of a view that the manna was actually eternally more valuable than anything in the buffet on the other side, right? And so their prayer was, give us this bread always. This needs to be our prayer to the Lord. And the Lord, when he teaches us how to pray in Matthew chapter 6, let's all read this together. What does he say at the bottom in Matthew 6:11?
Give us today our daily bread.
I don't know if you ever put that together. Give us today our daily bread. He's not speaking about outward sustenance to sustain us. Of course, he can meet that need. We need our portion of Christ for the day. And we need that to sustain us and to reconstitute us. The Lord is teaching us to pray in this way, to ask for the bread, to ask for the heavenly supply. So there's just some practical points here at the end, because now that we know that we need to eat, how do we eat? How do we eat? Matthew 4:4 is actually, this is spoken also in Deuteronomy, but it says, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out through the mouth of God. Let me ask you a question. Where do you find the words that proceed out of the mouth of God? In the Bible, right? In the Bible. Okay, so one way to eat would be reading the Bible. One way to be, to eat would be reading the Bible. And we can actually turn verses into prayer. Sometimes you come and you don't have a prayer. You don't have anything, and you're just before the Lord. You're reading, you're enjoying something, but you don't have a prayer. You can use the words of the Scripture to pray. You, like I mentioned, you can just say, Lord, today give me my daily bread. You're using a verse. You're not making that up. You're not coming up with something that you think is very eloquent. You're just using what you're reading to turn it into prayer. So one way is reading and praying over the Bible. And another time is spending time with the Lord in the morning. I think I mentioned this early on with the verses in Psalms, but I'll give you Exodus 16:21. They gathered it morning by morning, each one according to his eating. And when the sun became hot, it melted. What's really interesting is there's a portion that's called an omer. And if everybody were to go out and collect right now, if we were in that situation, you have a particular portion. I have a particular portion that I can eat. Aaron and I were talking about it. How many pieces of pizza can you eat? Not the best example of a good diet, right? But it's different. They're different numbers, right? There's a different portion of what we would take in and what we can handle and what we would eat. Yet some collected more and they still had an omer, and some collected less and they still had an omer. The idea here is that when we come to the Lord, he knows our exact portion. He knows our need. He knows what we can handle, and he knows which words we need and what portion we need. So, if we both spend, if Aaron and I were talking about that, actually, let me just say this. If Aaron and I just went through that line tonight and looked at the pizza on the table, and we talked about it, and we admired it, and we talked about how it was made, both of us would still be hungry, right?
Yeah.
In fact, we'd probably be a little more hungry because we've seen what was offered and we didn't partake of it. So there's a principle here that in the morning we need to spend time with the Lord to gather our portion. Not to talk about it, not to just kind of appreciate the idea, not to say, I agree with Lamar, I agree with this picture, that was the children of Israel, the Lord's going to give me a portion. But we need to come to the Lord and ask him to give us today our daily bread. We need to ask for this portion. So spend time with the Lord in the morning. Then the other thing was you couldn't keep manna for very long. If you had it for an extended period of time, actually more than a day, it would grow worms. And it says it would breed worms and it would stink. So there's a principle here that we need to have a daily habit. We need to have a daily habit of coming to the Lord because, again, I mentioned you can't eat today for the next 3 or 4 days or 5 days, right? You're only sustained today by what you eat today. And the Lord is very, very capable of giving you that exact portion. 2 Corinthians 4:16 is a New Testament version that kind of speaks to that situation of building up a daily habit. It shows us what happens in our constitution. Let's read that together. Nope, it's not up there. It's down here. Okay, so it's towards the bottom. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Ready? Go.
Therefore, we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day.
Okay, we only have today. We need to be diligent to gather our portion and spend time with the Lord. But the last part of this is, when the children of Israel were called out, everybody might be familiar with the term or the phrase from the first part of the verse, let my people go. Okay, when Moses was talking to Pharaoh, what's the second half of that verse? Anybody know? You got part of it. What is it? So that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. So that they may hold a feast to me. Can you have a feast by yourself? No, can't. So we need to come together with companions. We need to come together with one another. We need to spend time to get in the Word. And, if Aaron and I were just talking about how many pieces of pizza we could eat, it wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable if we came and we sat down and we ate that pizza together, and then he enjoyed one type, I enjoyed another type. We had a conversation about it, right? And then we might both have a higher appreciation for that type of food. That's what happens when we come together and we fellowship. So 2 Timothy 2:22 is kind of this is Paul speaking to Timothy. And I think we all need to kind of take heed to this because this is actually going to be our salvation or part of our salvation in the wilderness. We need to realize we're not in the wilderness alone. The wilderness is arranged by the Lord. What the Lord's doing in the wilderness is great and awesome in his view, but we can't do it alone. We need others. We need other believers. He didn't call one person. He didn't call Moses into the wilderness. He called the children of Israel, and he's reconstituting a people. So there's a plurality here. So 2 Timothy 2:22, let's read that together. Ready? Go.
Pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of their hearts.
Okay. You can't eat without opening your mouth, right? There's some need for prayer. There's some need for fellowship. There's some need, for us to um, pray with one another and to get in the word together. Um, so we need to open our mouth to exercise our spirit, to contact the Lord, to have our constitution changed, and even to enjoy Him. You can eat and not enjoy. But what's laid out is actually like you could call manna a superfood, right? It's laid out and we'd sustain them for 38 years. It doesn't say what was in there. It doesn't say, I mean, I don't know how that worked, but it was enough to build armies that took over land. So this was a food that was fully complete in its nutritional value, and what God gives us in our supply fully sustains us. So one last thing I wanted to leave you with is, if we don't enjoy the Lord sufficiently enough, the danger is that we will still be enslaved to the Egyptian things. So there's this picture of us coming out of through the Red Sea. Remember in the beginning I mentioned now we're talking about getting the Egypt out of us. Those things in our constitution can become bondage to us. They were no longer physically enslaved, but their constitution was enslaving them because they were not reconstituted as heavenly people yet. So making up our mind doesn't work. Making up your mind to eat something doesn't work unless you eat it. So, I'm going to leave some time here for the groups and to open that fellowship that, we would kind of maybe have some fellowship in a group as to what it means to eat the Lord. What is a practical example of it? And how do we do that when we come to the Lord in the morning? And how do we do that when we're together as a group? Okay, so I'll leave it here.
All right, thank you, Lamar. Did you take the clicker? Oh, I got it. Okay. Did he click it already? Oh, ready for the surprise? Okay. Drum roll. Woo! We're supposed to be excited. Yeah, I'll be excited. Okay. So for the Bible Reading Challenge, I think we're a little behind, so we gotta, catch up. Todd, I'm looking at you. Just kidding. But in all seriousness, though, if you're reading, just log your reading. Okay. All right. Because we're looking not that great at the moment, but it's okay. Yes, very good. Izzy, you got a question? The question is, if you're an overachiever, that's a good question. If you read more, we might have to do like a sprint post spring break. You know what I mean? Like we'll maybe open up to have more chapters. But at this point in time, we are limited to how many chapters are given in the challenge every week. Does that make sense? Another question. Well, this is a question time. If you know the answer to that question, then you should. I don't know. That's a great question. If you're bad at for filling it out, that's a good question. There is maybe next week we'll put on there. There's a website that has all the Bible reading weeks. You can go to and just check the ones and click them. Right, Matt? Matt will explain next week. How about that? Come next week and Matt will teach you. Okay, yeah, Matt will send a link to the group and everyone will see it. Okay. All right. What's our next announcement? Oh yeah. So this week we're reading Galatians 6 through Philippians 4, unless you're reading Genesis, like Bethany, or whatever you want to read. I think this is supposed to say college conference, but it's okay. So we're the reminder that we're having a college conference on March 20th through 30th in the mountains. The important thing to note is the deadline is March 9th, which I believe is like next Sunday, right? Next week, yeah. So if you want to go, sign up quickly. It's also on here if you need to. It's on here if you need the website. Okay. So the last announcement. All right. So we mentioned this last week. We're mentioning it again this week. We are doing a discipleship program during the semester for you all, and we call it the Timothy Mission. And last week I talked about it for probably too long. Maybe we can agree on that. So this time, instead of me trying to convince you to do it, which I don't need to do necessarily, the Lord needs to convince you, but to give you some practical what it looks like, we actually asked the people who did it last semester to come and give you guys a little bit of their own experience. So if people who are going to speak up, come on up here. You guys can pass around the mic. Mariah, I guess you're starting.
Oh, okay.
Mariah's going to start. Go ahead.
So my favorite, is that on?
It's not for live stream.
Okay. My favorite thing about the Timothy team was just building fellowship and making new friendships with people part of it, and just hearing like different perspectives of the same faith essentially. And something I walked away with from Timothy team was just number one, confidence in sharing what I believe, and the idea that if you believe in, the main faith that Jesus is God, God's son, and he came and died for us and he rose again, that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, no matter denomination or anything.
Nice. Yeah, one reason that I really liked the Timothy team was, kind of hitting what Mariah said, right, is the fellowship. And we've all read our portion of the gospel at one point, right? And everyone in this room probably has different interpretations of what they got out of it. And, being able to sit down with your brothers and sisters and kind of talk about it, for me, it gave me a good way of wow, I didn't really see it that way. And then when I do go back and try to explain, excuse me, the gospel to someone that doesn't know it as well, I can take that information and, use that. And that helps me grow. And that helps me kind of, grow. And I've also grown a lot closer with the Lord, with the Timothy mission as well. Because, like I've mentioned multiple times already, just being able to learn from my brothers and sisters too, and being able to take what I've learned from Timothy mission and apply it to my own personal life helped me grow as a person a lot.
So my experience from the Timothy team was from the freshman year, fall semester. There's the Timothy team, and then there's the Timothy mission. And the Timothy team, I initially first received a text message from Paul. Was like, bro, you should join the Timothy team. And I remember at that time just looking to myself, and because having the story of who Timothy was, who was a spiritual child of Paul, and who was going against the degradation of the church, I was just looking at myself and was saying that I am not worthy to be serving the Lord. But then actually I saw the Lord just work in that situation where actually we are a thorn bush in his eyes, so we actually should not even lean on ourselves at all. And then I just saw the Lord just begin to work in me and show me that we are all called to be Timothys. And so, yeah.
Yeah, for me, one of the things I learned from the Timothy team was learning how to present the gospel. And one of the main things is that, when you're going to, share the gospel, you don't know where to start. And it's kind of good to know how to start. So, yeah, I learned about how what the common faith is about, which is about Jesus coming down of heaven, then becoming flesh. He became flesh and he dwelled among us, and he died on the cross for our sin to redeem us. And then he was buried, and then he rose up again and ascended into heaven, and then he came down as the life-giving spirit, and that now dwells in us. And yeah, you just have to. The Lord is kind of like a train, and our job as believers is to lay the tracks for Jesus to go on. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if you want to be able to do that, then you can join Timothy Mission. One thing that's worth noting is that I mentioned this last week, but it's 2 parts. The first part is in April, where we'll kind of get together once a week. We'll have fellowship, we'll have workshops, we'll kind of work through, practice some of these things. And then the second part will be right when Ram Welcome begins, when school starts. We'll have a retreat that weekend, and then we'll go and do outreach and meet all the incoming freshmen, all 5,000 of them, or however many there are. So anyways, we're not going to meet all of them, but we're going to go talk to, a lot of them. All right. So if you want to do it, you should pray about it first. You should pray about it. You shouldn't do it because I said you should do it, or because we give good testimonies. You should do it because the Lord is leading you to do it. And the deadline to sign up for it is March 25th, and the QR code's here. So yeah. All right. You guys ready for groups?